The sun was low over the wide plains when a man named Ethan rode his horse toward the small auction yard on the edge of a dying town. He was a quiet rancher, known by few and liked by fewer. Not because he was unkind, but because he rarely spoke. Years alone on the land had made him silent and careful. His only company was the wind, the cattle, and the long stretch of dust between him and the world. He had come to town for supplies, maybe to buy a new saddle or a mule. But that morning, the poster outside the trading post caught his eye. It said, "Labor auction today. Women seeking work and shelter." Ethan looked at it for a long time, feeling something stir in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity, maybe hope. When he arrived at the yard, there was a crowd. Farmers and miners stood around as a few poor souls were brought forward. Widows, wanderers, girls without homes. It wasn't cruel like slave markets he'd read about. It was more like people paying a fee to offer room and food to those who had nowhere to go. Still, the air felt heavy, like sorrow had settled over the place. Then, near the end of the line, a small figure was led out. She wore a faded dress and had a brown cloth bag tied over her head. People whispered, some laughed, others turned away. "They say she don't speak," one man murmured. "Won't show her face neither." Another added, "She's cursed maybe. Been through something bad." Ethan's gaze stayed fixed on her. The woman stood still, her hands trembling slightly, but she didn't look weak. There was something in her posture, a quiet strength. The auctioneer cleared his throat and said, "This one ain't saying her name, but she needs a place. She can cook, clean, and do field work. We'll start at $5. No one moved. The auctioneer sighed. $1 then, anyone?" Ethan stepped forward before he could think. "I'll pay one." The crowd turned to stare. The auctioneer raised a brow but nodded. "Sold to the lonely rancher," someone joked from the back. Ethan ignored them. He walked forward, handed over the dollar, and gently took the woman by the arm. "Come on," he said quietly. She nodded once, still hiding her face. They left town as the evening wind picked up. The road was long and empty. The woman didn't speak, only held her small bundle of belongings close. Ethan didn't push her. He wasn't good with questions anyway. By the time they reached his ranch, the stars had come out. It was a modest place. Wood walls, a porch that creaked, and fields that stretched far beyond sight. He helped her down from the horse. "You can stay here," he said. "There's food inside. You don't owe me anything except work and respect." She nodded again. He thought he heard her whisper something, but the wind carried it away. For the next few days, she moved around the house like a ghost. She cooked meals, cleaned the rooms, and tended the chickens. She worked hard, never complained. Ethan noticed she was gentle with the animals. Even the wild mare no one could touch before now stood calm when she passed. Sometimes he'd find her standing by the window, her hands still as if lost in thought. One morning he came in from the barn and found her humming softly while she kneaded bread. Her voice was low and sweet. When she realized he was there, she froze as if afraid she'd done something wrong. "It's all right," he said softly. "You can hum if you like." She gave the smallest nod. Each day the silence between them became less heavy. She'd leave warm tea by his door at sunrise, and he'd leave an extra blanket near the fire at night. Still, she never took off the bag over her head. Ethan often wondered what she looked like, what secret made her hide so carefully, but he didn't ask. He had learned that some wounds weren't ready for words. Weeks passed. The ranch began to feel alive again. Flowers started to grow by the fence where she watered them, and the animals seemed calmer. Ethan started talking a little more about the weather, the crops, the long winters. Sometimes she would tilt her head slightly, like she was listening closely even though she never answered. One evening, as they sat by the fire, a storm howled outside. Thunder rolled and the wind slammed against the windows. Ethan noticed her hands shaking. "You afraid of storms?" he asked. She didn't move for a moment, then whispered, "Not of storms." Her voice was so soft he almost thought he imagined it, but it was the first time he'd heard her speak. He turned to look at her, surprised but gentle. "Then of what?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled the blanket tighter and turned toward the fire. Ethan didn't push her further, but he couldn't sleep that night. Her voice stayed in his mind like a melody that wouldn't fade. Days turned into months. The ranch prospered. Ethan began to smile again. The woman, still nameless, became a part of his life in small, quiet ways. Once when he fell from his horse, she ran to him, her hands trembling as she cleaned the cut on his arm. "You could have been hurt," she said in a frightened tone. He looked at her in surprise again. her second sentence since she arrived. "I'm fine," he said with a faint smile. "You care?" She didn't answer, but her hands lingered for a moment before she pulled away. Then came the evening that changed everything. It was autumn, the air cool and still. Ethan sat on the porch watching the sunset. She stood beside him, holding a small basket of apples she had picked. He finally said, "You've been here nearly 6 months. I don't even know your name." For a long time she didn't move. Then slowly, she reached up to the edge of the bag. Her fingers hesitated. "If I tell you," she whispered, "you'll send me away." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Why would I do that?" She shook her head. "Because people always do." He stood and took a step closer. "I won't." His voice was steady, kind. "You can trust me." The bag trembled in her hands. He could see her breathing fast. Then in one slow motion she lifted it. Beneath the cloth was a young woman with deep brown eyes, soft features, and a small scar near her temple. Her hair was dark and fell to her shoulders. She looked frightened, like she expected him to shout or turn away. But Ethan only stared, not in shock but in quiet awe. "My name is Clara," she said, her voice shaking. "I ran away from a man who wanted to own me. I hid my face because he said no one would ever take me in again if they knew." For a moment neither spoke. The wind carried the smell of hay and rain through the air. Then Ethan said softly, "You're safe here, Clara. No one will ever hurt you again." Tears welled in her eyes. "You mean that?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "I mean it." She took a step closer, and for the first time since she came to his ranch, she smiled. A small, trembling smile that made something inside him feel whole again. The bag fell from her hand and landed in the dust. The storm clouds above them began to fade, and the moon rose quietly over the plains. That night, Ethan sat by the fire long after she went to sleep. He looked at the empty bag on the table and thought of her name, her face, her courage. He realized he hadn't just given a home to a stranger. He had found a reason to stop being lonely. And though he didn't know it yet, that moment was only the beginning of a story that would bind them together forever. The morning after Clara showed her face, the ranch felt different. Sunlight poured through the windows, brighter than before. Ethan walked outside and saw her standing near the corral feeding the horses. Without that old brown bag on her head, she looked like someone who had been hidden too long from the world. The horses seemed calmer around her, like they sensed her gentle heart. Ethan stood for a while just watching her, not saying anything. For the first time in many years, he felt peace in his chest. When she noticed him, she gave a shy smile and said, "Good morning," in a small voice. It surprised him how soft her tone was, like music he didn't know he missed. He nodded and said good morning back. That small exchange meant more than words could tell. Clara worked all day, humming to herself while she cooked and cleaned. Ethan kept busy with the cattle, but his mind often wandered back to her. He thought about her bravery, how she had carried her pain alone and how she still managed to smile after everything. He didn't ask questions about her past. She had given him her name, and to him that was already a gift. As weeks went by, life settled into something gentle. Clara would pack him lunch every morning before he rode out. Sometimes she would walk to the fence to hand him water when the sun was high. One evening she sewed new curtains for the kitchen. They were simple, white and soft against the light. When Ethan noticed them, he said quietly, "Feels like a real home now." She smiled at that, and he saw a small tear in her eye she quickly wiped away. Winter came early that year. Cold winds swept across the plains, and snow began to fall on the fence posts. Ethan worried she might feel trapped inside, but Clara didn't seem afraid anymore. She baked bread, mended his coats, and sat near the fire every night with a book in her hands. Sometimes she would read aloud softly while he mended tools. Her voice filled the small cabin with warmth. One night, as the fire burned low, Ethan finally asked, "Clara, do you ever miss the place you came from?" She shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "There was nothing left for me there. People can break you without lifting a hand. I was told I didn't deserve kindness. Then you gave it to me without asking who I was." Ethan looked at her, his eyes gentle. "Maybe that's what we both needed," he said. "Someone to see us again." After that, they talked more. She told him little things about her life before. The fields she used to play in, the mother she lost young, the nights she slept hungry. She never said the name of the man she had escaped from, and Ethan never asked. He just listened. Sometimes he would tell her stories of his own, about how he once had dreams of a family, of laughter in the house. But life had turned quiet after his parents passed. Clara said softly, "You're not alone anymore." Their days grew closer, their silences easier. Once, when Ethan came home soaked from rain, Clara rushed to bring him a blanket. As she helped dry his hair, their hands brushed and both froze for a moment. She looked up at him, her brown eyes filled with something soft and uncertain. Ethan stepped back, careful not to frighten her, but she whispered, "Thank you for being kind." Spring arrived. Flowers began to bloom around the porch. Clara planted seeds behind the barn, and soon green sprouts pushed through the earth. Every morning, Ethan saw her kneeling there, her hands in the soil, sunlight in her hair. He realized he had started waiting for that sight every day. One afternoon, the sheriff came riding by. He greeted Ethan and glanced toward the house. "Heard you got someone staying with you," he said with a curious smile. Ethan nodded. "She's been helping around the ranch." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Well, folks been asking. Someone's been looking for a missing woman in the next county. Name's Clara, too." Ethan felt his heart stop. That evening, when Clara returned from the garden, he told her gently what the sheriff said. She froze, the color leaving her face. "They found me," she whispered. Ethan stepped closer. "You don't have to be afraid," he said. "You're safe here." She looked up at him, tears gathering. "You don't understand," she said softly. "He'll come. He always does." Ethan felt something heavy in his chest, but he stayed calm. "If anyone comes," he said, "they'll talk to me first." For the next few days, Clara barely slept. Ethan stayed close, keeping his rifle nearby, though he prayed he'd never have to use it. But no one came. One morning, a letter arrived. It was from the sheriff. Inside, it said the man looking for her had been caught trying to rob a train. Ethan read it aloud to her. Clara covered her mouth, tears streaming down. "So it's over," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "It's over." She fell into his arms, trembling with relief. After that day, something changed between them. The fear that had always lived in her eyes was gone. She laughed more. She sang while she worked. One evening, she cooked stew and insisted Ethan sit while she served him. He watched her moving around the kitchen, her hair loose, her face calm. When she finally sat across from him, he said softly, "Clara, I don't know what I'd do without you here." Her eyes lifted to his. "Then don't send me away," she said. "Ever." Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. "You have my word," he said, "as long as you'll stay." She smiled through tears. A few weeks later, Clara began to sew a dress. Ethan didn't ask why, though he noticed it was finer than her usual clothes. One evening, she stood before him wearing it, a soft cream color that glowed in the lamplight. "Do you think," she said shyly, "a woman like me could start again, could have a life, a family, maybe even love?" Ethan looked at her, his voice deep and steady. "I think you already have," he said. That night, he walked her to the old oak tree near the pasture. The moon was high and the grass shimmered silver. "Clara," he said quietly, "you came here with nothing, but you gave me everything. I don't know how to say it right, but I want you to stay as more than just someone I helped." She looked up, eyes wide. "What do you mean?" He took a breath. "I mean, will you marry me? Not out of pity, not out of debt, because I can't imagine this ranch or my life without you in it." For a long moment, Clara just stared at him. Then tears rolled down her cheeks and she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." They married quietly the next day. The preacher from town came, and only 2 neighbors stood as witnesses. Clara wore the same cream dress and Ethan wore his cleanest shirt. When the preacher asked her name, she spoke it clearly and proudly. "Clara May." Ethan smiled when he heard it, remembering the day she had said it for the first time by the fire. After the vows, the preacher shook Ethan's hand and left them alone. Clara turned to him, her eyes shining. "Do you still think it's strange you paid only $1 for me?" she teased softly. Ethan chuckled and touched her hand. "Best dollar I ever spent," he said. As the sun set behind the hills, they stood on the porch together. The wind carried the scent of rain and wildflowers. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "You gave me a name again, a home, and a reason to live." Ethan smiled, his arm around her. "And you gave me a heart again," he said. In the quiet that followed, the ranch no longer felt lonely. The fields stretched wide and golden. The cattle moved lazily in the distance, and the old oak tree stood tall as if watching over them. Clara's laughter echoed softly through the air, mixing with the sound of the wind. And from that day on, everyone in town knew the story of the lonely rancher who paid $1 for a woman with a bag over her head and found a love worth more than anything money could ever buy.